Welcome back, Irish fans, to Breaking Down Braves Boys podcast. Today, Georgia Tech versus Notre Dame preview. They're playing tomorrow, Saturday. Should be a pretty good game, actually. Here with the preview, I talked with Bryce Kuhn with 24/7 Sports covering Georgia Tech. We actually talked before the first game, which was supposed to happen. Got canceled about 10 minutes after we got off the call. So uh, some of the stuff he says will be a little bit dated because we were only like 3 or 4 games into the year at that point. But for the great majority of what he said is still relevant. So gonna keep that in. So here you go. Here's when I talk to him, and I'll be back after to talk about the game from Notre Dame perspective, and I have a couple clips from Coach Bray talking about the game. So here we go. We have Bryce Kuhn, covers Georgia Tech basketball for 24/7 Sports, The Hive. So I have him here. Going to ask him a few questions about Georgia Tech so we can get some insight on them, and he can kind of preview the game from their perspective. So thanks for coming on, man, and I guess we'll get into it. So to start, can you just give us a quick overview of each of the 5 starters?
Yeah, so kind of what Georgia Tech's rolling with, and I appreciate you having me on talking about this because it's an exciting it's been an exciting kind of season so far for Georgia Tech. It started off slow with the 2 losses to the 2 in-state teams, but really they started to kind of pick up the pace. But the starting 5, man, they really pride themselves on defense. You take a look at the guards, Jose Alvarado, the senior. He's kind of coming to his own offensively this year. I mean, he's been a guy who's really taken pride in kind of being a focal point and a leader for this team. And now he's contributing on the offensive end, back-to-back 20-plus point games for Alvarado. So he's going to be kind of where the offense runs through. And then you throw in a guy like Michael DeVoe, who has kind of been a hybrid role. Now, we'll see. I'm actually going to be a part of the media availability a little bit later today. We'll kind of see what happens with DeVoe. He's kind of been a 6-man. He's kind of been in that kind of 2-guard, combo guard kind of position. But he's a guy who he'll have a game where he scores like 5 points, but then has like 3 blocks and like 6 or 7 steals, or then he'll put up 25 points. So he's really a guy who's kind of a wild card. He can kind of do things both on the floor. You kind of look at the three. The 3 kind of rotates in and out. We've seen a mix of guys. Georgia Tech does go, and I will say this. We can talk more about this with Notre Dame as well. Georgia Tech does kind of play small. They had to do that last week against North Carolina. So they got their big man in the middle. I'll go with him first, Moses Wright. And Moses Wright he's a guy who Josh Pastner has said came in his freshman year and was nowhere near ready to play in the ACC. Now he has really made himself very dominant in the middle, very good defender, can do some things with the ball. But Jordan Usher is going to be the kind of guy that's going to rotate between the 3 and the 4. We'll also maybe see a little bit about Rodney Howard. He, as a transfer from Georgia, he'll play. And I think when you kind of look, also Kyle Sturdivant is kind of made his way into when they run that small lineup, he'll kind of line up at the 3. Jordan Usher will kind of line up at the 4. It kind of depends on how they roll out there. But Joey, with how everything's going on, I can tell you for sure Moses Wright and Jose Alvarado will be in the starting lineup. When you look at DeVoe, he will be, but that 3-4 spot, we'll have to see kind of what happens.
For sure. You talked about Moses Wright a little bit. I remember in the offseason a potential kind of weakness for Georgia Tech was replacing James Banks and not really having a true down low post guy. How have they replaced him this year, and is that still an area of weakness?
Well, Joey, I think it was evident in the first 2 games of the season. They missed him. I mean, James Banks was a great defender around the rim. And if he didn't get a block, he's one of those guys who guards were hesitant to go inside because of his presence. I mean, he's a big guy. And so missing Banks definitely hurt. Now, we'll say that is something we saw. I was at the Kentucky game, and Kentucky's definitely not as good as any of us thought they were going to be this year. But they had trouble. They did have trouble down low with Moses down low and trying to work some things out. So I think from the Kentucky game on, we've seen him take some steps to become a better interior defender, whether that's blocking a shot, whether that's switching inside, not allowing easy baskets. So I would say they've gotten better, but you were right with what you said. That was an issue coming in. How do you replace James Banks and his production down low and kind of what he's able to do? I think Moses Wright is filling in admirably right now. I think that they definitely love to have Banks back there, but Moses Wright is from game 2 to where we are now. He's definitely taken a lot of strides moving forward.
for sure. So I remember last year Georgia Tech would pretty much ball screen you to death with Banks and Alvarado, and they'd mostly play man against us. I remember. So has that scheme changed at all? And if it has, or if it hasn't, can you give us a quick overview on their scheme and kind of what they like to do?
Yeah, well, the one thing that Josh Pastner says is he does not want to give the ball a headache, and by that means dribbling it way too much. He wants to keep the ball and keep it passing. So you talked about what Georgia Tech did last year between Banks and Alvarado. Like I said, Alvarado is going to be bringing the ball off the floor, but I think a dimension of what this team has kind of changed. You know, they shot over 50% last time out, if I'm not mistaken, against Wake Forest. Wake Forest obviously has had a lot of struggles, so they're not a great team to compare to, but I think when you look at this team and what they do, they're still going to run that kind of high-low ball screen, maybe a little pick-and-roll action with Moses Wright. They're going to get him involved. But kind of what's emerged over the past couple of games is the kick-out. A guy that I failed to mention was Bubba Parham. He's been a guy who has been kind of shooting the ball pretty well. They have some guys, including Sturdivant, who can be out there on the perimeter on the wing to hit that knockdown shot, to give them another element that they haven't had in years prior. And so I think that when you see this team, it makes them a little bit more dangerous because, hey, now you can't just focus on the pick and roll or a little pick and pop action with Moses Wright, who is capable of hitting a mid-range jumper. You're going to have to focus on some of those wing players that could maybe hit you from outside. They're not going to live and die by the three ball. This is not a team that is going to shoot, 20, 25, 33s a game or anything like that. But if the opportunity's there, they definitely have the players. And I would say that's the biggest shift in the scheme is they're still going to stay with kind of running that pick and roll and some on-ball screens, off-ball screens as well. But you got to kind of look for some of the guys outside who can maybe hit some deep twos or some threes.
For sure. Just wanted to add, I think Bubba Parham is definitely suited to play in the South. I don't think that's a guy you're going to see playing college basketball in the Midwest. But
no doubt about it.
So we saw you were talking about earlier, they lost to Mercer and Georgia State early on in the season, and they've kind of turned it around since against some decent teams like UNC. Has anything really changed, or is it just a matter of luck?
Well, I'll say this, and we talked with Coach Pastner right after the Mercer and Georgia State, and give credit. You know, I'm from the state of Georgia, and it's kind of funny. My sister is actually a cheerleader for Mercer, so I've been to a ton of their basketball games, and they're well-coached mid-major teams. I mean, Georgia State is a perennial. They can make the tournament. They've made the tournament, I want to say, at least 2 out of the last 3 years. So they're a good team. And obviously everybody remembers Mercer because of the upset of Duke a couple years ago. I guess it's been longer than that now. But I think when you look at this team, and I don't necessarily agree with this, Joey, but I think when you look at this team, when they went into practice, they did not go full contact because they didn't want to get shut down because of COVID, and that was a big scare. After the loss to Mercer, I think that kind of switched as they were like, we've got to take some measures. We don't want to get shut down. Nobody does. It affects your entire season having to sit out for 2 weeks. But I think when you kind of look at their schedule, obviously they had the 2 losses there. Their next game was against Kentucky, primetime ESPN game. They turned it around. Great defensive effort. Then they go on the road to Nebraska. They lose 1 to Florida State, but I mean, you can't fault you there. Florida State's a top 15 team right now. They're a good team. But they did build that resume up against, and no disrespect to these programs, of Florida A&M, a Delaware State, the UAB game got canceled. But I would say the biggest thing has just been how they practiced. How they've practiced, they've been a little bit more physical. They've taken – this is a team that traditionally is a really good defensive team. They struggle offensively. Well, this year it's kind of been switched. They're starting to pick up defensively, but I would say that biggest thing is just changing how they've practiced. And really, and Jose Alvarado said this last week, he said it's really been a big difference of how we've communicated. He just feels like the communication is cleaner, crisper. And you throw in guys who are having to get more minutes. You don't get a regular type of offseason to train. You put them in this type of situation right here, and I think that it's going to take a couple games. And now we're seeing maybe the Georgia Tech team we thought we were going to see game 1 or game 2.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I wanted to add, I'm also looking at going to college at Mercer, also a Georgia native.
Okay.
That was an interesting game for me to watch, ACC team versus.
Yeah.
So, but what do you think their biggest strength is and weakness as a team? You kind of brought up how they're way more dangerous offensively now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the offense has taken a step. This is a team, like I said, in years past, they've prided themselves on defense, and they've had – when Jose Alvarado was not on the floor, they struggled just to have a kind of a focal point. And I think we've seen a combination of really Kyle Sturdivant, the transfer from USC, who has been coming into his own. He's an Atlanta guy. He comes back home and he seems to getting more comfortable in Pastner's system. And he attributes that honestly to, working a lot with Alvarado one-on-one, trying to, become that. Because I think, and Joe, you watch enough basketball, a team is only as good as its depth, and especially in a year right now. Georgia Tech's depth, I would say that's a big strength for them right now. The depth is there where in years prior it hasn't been. And then when you look at a weakness, I would say I'd also go back to a little bit sometimes offensively. They can go quiet for long periods of time. And I think when you get into a game like Florida State, we saw they went quiet for long periods of time, and Florida State's too talented to be able to do that against. So that'll be something looking to see how Notre Dame counteracts that, because if they go quiet for a long time, Notre Dame builds a run, it's going to be awfully hard. And you can sometimes see when Georgia Tech will feel like they're under pressure, they got to press a little bit more and take some shots they're not as more comfortable with when they get behind maybe double digits or something like that.
Sounds very similar to Notre Dame. A lot of huge scoring droughts have been one of the main issues this year. And you talked about it seems only as good as their depth. Notre Dame, maybe that's why Notre Dame's 3-6 right now, because they've had to go 6 deep in some games. So, not ideal start to the season. Hopefully, tomorrow can be a turnaround. But what do you think Georgia Tech has to do to beat Notre Dame?
Well, I would say the biggest thing is they're going to have to continue, and I'm going to beat the dead horse on this, Joey, the communication. There's a very big difference when you watch Georgia Tech, and if you watch any of their film, of what they do defensively when they kind of get a little bit lackadaisical, a little bit lazy on the defensive end. And pastors talked about that. Sometimes they'll sag off a little bit defensively, and that's when another team feels like, hey, now we can apply the pressure. And to me, Tech's a team that's going to have to apply pressure. If they go into this game, and like you said, they look at a Notre Dame team that, to me, is a better team than a 3-6 record. If they look at that, they just look at the record, which they got a lot of veteran guys. Hopefully they won't. But when they look at that, if they just kind of say, oh, they're 3-6, we can, kind of coast in here, they could get behind early. And that's not a situation that Tech wants to be in. And so I think in order for the Jackets to kind of stay competitive, stay with this game and ultimately come out on top, they're going to have to attack early and often. Alvarado at times, and Moses Wright has said that he's looked at Alvarado, and Alvarado almost has a chip on his sholdder. I mean, listen, the ACC is very, very talented, and Alvarado has been a point guard in this conference for, it seems like forever, and forever now as a senior. And he knows his own game, and he can kind of direct the team. But I think he's going to have to pick his spots. And listen, the guy, like you talked about, there with the screen movement and everything that Alvarado can do. I mean, this is a guy who can really play to me with any point guard in the conference, especially right now. I mean, it's obviously kind of a down year a little bit with some of the Blue Bloods not being what they're usually are. But I think when you look at Tech's team, they're going to have to attack early and often. They're going to have to be a team that stays the aggressor. They can't get lackadaisical, because when they do, that's when a team can really start to take advantage of maybe some of those weaknesses we talked about, and they're not communicating. And obviously the big thing is the size. I mean, they just don't have it. They don't feel like, and I won't ramble on for too long, they don't feel like behind Moses Wright there's a number 2 kind of big man. And that's where they're struggling, is they're having to run these small lineups, and it works. I mean, listen, North Carolina, North Carolina has, I mean, I feel like every single guy on that team is above 6'4", 6'5", and they got a really, really big team, and it worked for Georgia Tech. So I don't know. I mean, I think they're going to have to attack early and often, and they're going to have to stay the aggressor for most of the game to really give themselves a good opportunity to come out on top.
Gotcha. Jose Alvarado definitely has shown that chip on his shoulder. Just won ACC Player of the Week, I'm pretty sure. Wanted to mention Nate Laszewski definitely got snubbed for that. Would have won if we didn't go 0-2 on the week, which seems like it could become a trend with him. But before I let you go, I got one more thing. I know predictions can get you in trouble sometimes, but what's your prediction for this one?
Well, listen, I'm not going, and I know you have a lot of Notre Dame fans that listen to this. I've watched a little bit of Notre Dame this year. I don't think they're as bad as 3-6. I think, like you said, they've had to kind of, the depth's been the issue, and it's an issue for a lot of teams. So I'm going to go with Georgia Tech in a close win. I think the idea of a home court advantage is not very it's not big this year, obviously, with some schools don't have any attendance, some schools have very limited. So they're not going to have to worry about, or what is, I mean, I've been to one Notre Dame basketball game my entire life, and it was an awesome experience. So, I mean, I know what the atmosphere is like when it's full capacity, but I think I'm going to go with Georgia Tech, and if I have to give you a score, I'll go close. I'll say 71-65. Georgia Tech hits a couple key free throws down the end to get a hard-fought win, but I'll tell you this, it wouldn't surprise me if Notre Dame comes out with a chip on their shoulder after going 0-2 last week and tries to make something, especially at home, defending that home court.
Mhm. Hope you're right about that last part, but not the first part. And
There we go.
yeah, but that's all I have for you today. Wanted to ask more like command you. Can you sneak me into the Notre Dame Georgia Tech game when they get to Atlanta? That would be
When they
much
get to
appreciated.
Atlanta, I think we can make it happen. I think we can make it happen. We'll have to see how we'll have to see, because I know that the attendance is so low, but we'll see if we can get you a media pass and get to the game.
That sounds like a good plan. Hopefully, we can get you back on the podcast before the second game, and then we can work out the details in the DMs. So, thank you for coming
Awesome.
on.
Appreciate it, Joey.
Thank you for coming on. Should be a good game, and hopefully, you're wrong about that prediction. But thank you for coming on, and go Irish. All right, so now that we've heard from Bryce about the game, let's hear from Coach Bray and what he had to say about Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech specifically. Certainly we know them a lot, but it's interesting to see how they become, I think, a little bit more of an offensive group. They're shooting, scoring. Alvarado really makes them go. And so our defense, which we, really, tried to be more committed to, will be challenged.
So now that we've heard from pretty much everybody about this game, I'm going to go into the keys and things to watch for, matchups to watch, stuff like that. So my keys: one, get on the glass. Notre Dame's actually averaging more rebounds a game than Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech has some really physical guys down low like Moses Wright, who I think could give Notre Dame a lot of trouble, just like James Banks did at times last year. Obviously, we had Mooney to combat that, though. I think it's going to be really important that Notre Dame gets on the glass and doesn't let Georgia Tech get a lot of second chance points, because that's something that they could definitely do to us, and it would probably kill us. So that's my first key. Two, handle Georgia Tech's athletic long guards on the perimeter. Jose Alvarado doesn't really meet that description, but he's a guy who can get up into you, kind of like Elijah Morgan or even Alex Wade, who's coming to Notre Dame next year. Guys who can both get into you. And then Michael DeVoe and Jordan Usher both have really long arms, athletic, can force some turnovers, get in passing lanes. So if Prentice, Cormac, and Trey can kind of handle that like they did last year, they did a good job of that. I think Notre Dame will be in a really good spot. And then three, production from Cormac, Wirtz, and Durham. I mean, Notre Dame doesn't really have a chance in a lot of games without these guys. They don't need production from all of them, but if they can get part of what they got against Wake Forest and Pitt, I don't know why that was slipping my mind. If they can get part of what they got from Cormac, Wirtz, and Durham against those teams, they're in good shape. Maybe Wirtz wasn't playing that well, at least scoring the ball, but he did make an impact on some of those games. So if two of those three guys can make a nice impact on this game, Notre Dame's going to have a great chance. And then things to watch for: how Notre Dame handles the perimeter, the length on the perimeter, and stuff like that. I think you can see him go into the zone because of that, because I think DeVoe and Usher will give you a really hard time going to the basket. Kind of leading in my second thing, does Bray go with the zone primarily to combat the pick and roll and combat guys going downhill? Jose Alvarado does a really good job working out of the pick and roll and creating for other guys. He's also averaging 17 a game somehow. I would have never thought Jose Alvarado would have scored 17 a game, but here we are. I think Bray could really go into the zone primarily. He's been kind of throwing that idea out there, and I think this could be a game where he starts. Going to be tough to stop Moses Wright one-on-one also. I don't think anybody on Notre Dame can really do that. Also, I think we could see some Tony Sanders to kind of combat DeVoe and Usher. I don't know for sure, though, because I think Bray really likes those seven, but there's a big drop-off after that. If one guy comes in, I would expect it to be Sanders, maybe Zona to kind of combat Moses Wright, but that's something else to watch for is if Zona or Sanders gets in. And then kind of going off of the depth thing, how deep does Georgia Tech go? Only 6 guys averaging 10-plus minutes a game. So that's really something to watch for. I think Notre Dame could really try to push the tempo of this game if Georgia Tech only goes 6 deep. I don't expect them to do that. I expect them to give some guys some spot minutes, but there's a lot of teams deeper than Georgia Tech in the league, even though Georgia Tech has a ton of guys on their roster. Not a whole lot of them are getting a ton of minutes, so definitely something to look for. Um, there's only a couple guys who have played double-digit games also. Only, the starting 5. So 8 guys have, or 7 guys have played in double-digit games this year for Georgia Tech. So I don't know that depth is necessarily an issue, but it's something Notre Dame could try to exploit. So there's that. And then that's kind of all I have for things to watch for. This game is going to be pretty basic, actually. Notre Dame's played this Georgia Tech group outside of James Banks. This is pretty much the same team Notre Dame played against last year. My matchup to watch, Moses Wright versus Juwan Durham / Lasevsky. I expect it to be mostly Durham. I think Moses Wright could have a big night, or I don't know what time the game is tomorrow. I think it's like 2:30. He could have a big day against Durham just because of how much bigger physically he is. But Durham has really emerged defensively, emerged in general actually, getting blocks. I think he should have had 5 blocks against Wake Forest, but they took one away. I know the announcers were harping on that, but I think that's something definitely Georgia Tech could have an advantage there. But if Durham can play the way he's been playing the last couple of games, Notre Dame could be in a nice spot. And then my leading scorer, going to go with Prentice Hub. Had a nice game against Georgia Tech last year in Atlanta. I wasn't able to watch the second one. Don't remember how he did there, but got off to a rough start in that game and then really got it going as of late, and they wouldn't have won that game without him. I think he's going to have another big game. I think Jose Alvarado is a good defender, but I think he's played against better defenders most of the year. So Hub should have a big night and big day. So that's something that I think could be for sure something that Notre Dame has an advantage in that matchup. I know Alvarado's had a really good year, but I think I like how Hub matches up with him, and that's what I have for my leading scorer. And then to end it off, my prediction, going to go with Notre Dame by 5. Notre Dame's been playing really good basketball lately. Pitt was a tough opponent, an opponent that was pretty similar to Georgia Tech, actually, outside of having a guy like Jose Alvarado. It's pretty much the same team, honestly. Length on the perimeter, big guy down low like Justin Champagnie and Moses Wright. I think Notre Dame – I don't know that Notre Dame matched up particularly well with Georgia Tech, but we swept them last year, and I think this is a team that I think it's a really good opportunity for Notre Dame, and I think it's a game they could go get based on the momentum they have, and I think they pretty much need this game. So thank you guys for watching. Go Irish. And I think they're playing Duke Wednesday, so I'll try to have a preview out for that. Thank you guys for watching. Go Irish. Peace.